Worldcomedy's Elite Children's Classics.
Pinocchio. Geppetto makes a puppet. Geppetto was a lonely old woodcarver who lived in a little room with one tiny window. One day, he decided to make a puppet and call him Pinocchio. He carved the eyes, and they rolled around. He carved the nose, and it kept growing. He finished the puppet, and it laughed at him and snatched off his wig. Geppetto said sadly, "You naughty son! Already you're treating your father badly." And he wiped away a tear. Pinocchio jumped to the floor and raced round and round the room and out the door. "Catch him!" cried Geppetto. But when the people saw a wooden puppet running down the street, they just laughed. Fortunately, a policeman grabbed Pinocchio by his long nose. The old father was angry and shouted, "You just wait till we get home!" Pinocchio threw himself on the ground and refused to walk. A crowd gathered and said, "Poor little puppet! Geppetto might tear him to pieces." The policeman agreed and let Pinocchio go free. Instead, he threw poor Geppetto into prison. The Talking Cricket. Pinocchio ran straight home and locked the door. Then, when he sat down to catch his breath, he heard, "Creak, creak, creak." "Who's calling me?" asked Pinocchio.
"I am the talking cricket who has lived here 100 years.
Pinocchio looked up and saw a big cricket creeping along the wall. "Go away! This is my room now," said Pinocchio rudely.
"First, I want to tell you something."
"Well, hurry up," returned Pinocchio. The cricket said,
"Boys who run away and don't mind their parents will be very sorry later."
"Well, I'm leaving at sunrise. I don't want to go to school."
"You poor fool. Don't you know if you only amuse yourself, you'll be a donkey someday?"
"Don't make me angry, Cricket."
Poor Pinocchio. I'm sorry for you.
"Why?"
"Because you have a wooden head."
Pinocchio picked up a big hammer and threw it at the cricket, crushing him. It cried,
"Cree! Cree!"
weakly and died. Pinocchio finds an egg. Pinocchio was painfully hungry, and he searched the room for food. Imagine his disappointment when he found the soup kettle was only painted on the wall. As he got hungrier, he began to cry, saying, "The cricket was right. If my father was here, I wouldn't be dying of hunger." Then he found an egg in the corner, and he kissed it joyfully. But when he broke it, tack! Out popped a little yellow chick. It bowed politely, saying,
"Thank you,"
and disappeared out of the window. Pinocchio cried and screamed. "Oh, why did I run away? Hunger is terrible." Pinocchio burns his feet. Now, it was night. The wind was cold, with violent thunder and lightning. Pinocchio was frightened, but he ran through the village streets with his tongue hanging out. Everything was closed, but finally he pushed a doorbell. A man stuck his head out of a window and shouted angrily, "What do you want?" "Just a little bread, please, sir," pleaded Pinocchio. The man told Pinocchio to wait and soon returned. "Stand by the window," he called. Pinocchio did so, and a great kettle of water was poured down on him. The puppet returned home wet, exhausted, and still hungry. He placed his cold wooden feet on the brazier and fell asleep. At daybreak, Geppetto returned and knocked on the door. "Open up!" shouted Geppetto. "I can't, Daddy," cried the marionette, rolling over on the floor. "Somebody has eaten my feet." Geppetto angrily climbed in the window, but when he saw his son lying on the floor, he kissed him and cried, "My dear little Pinocchio, how did you burn your feet?" Pinocchio poured out his whole story and ended, "I'm still so hungry." Geppetto took 3 pears from his pocket and gave them to Pinocchio. "These were for my breakfast, but I give them to you willingly." "If you want me to eat them, you must peel them," whined Pinocchio. "I don't like the skins." Geppetto was shocked, but he peeled the pears, and the puppet devoured them. He was still hungry, so he ate the peels too. Then he sighed happily. "Ah, that's better." Geppetto buys a schoolbook. Now Pinocchio began to cry because he wanted new feet. Geppetto made him wait half a day, saying, "If I make you new feet, you'll escape again." "No, no, I'll be good. I'll go to school and study hard. I promise." Geppetto's eyes filled with tears, and he set to work making 2 little feet. When they were glued on, Pinocchio danced around the room. He stopped and said, "But I'll need clothes and a book for school." Geppetto made him a flowered paper suit. Then he put on his old, patched coat and ran outside. He returned in his shirt sleeves, but he had a fine schoolbook in his hand. Pinocchio kissed his father over and over. Pinocchio sells his book. Pinocchio started for school, full of dreams. "Today, I'll learn to read. Tomorrow, I'll learn to write. Then, I'll learn my numbers. I'll earn lots of money and buy Father a gold coat with diamond buttons." Just then, he heard music in the distance. He only hesitated a moment before saying, "Today, I'll listen to music. Tomorrow, I'll go to school." He ran to a square full of people. A big poster said, "Great Puppet Show." It was just beginning, but it cost 2 pence. The puppet forgot about his father, shivering at home, and sold his book for 2 pence. As soon as Pinocchio entered, The puppet actors recognized him. He leapt onto the stage where he was kissed and hugged by Harlequin, Punchinello, and all the marionettes. They completely forgot the performance until the audience started shouting, "We want the play!" Suddenly, a very tall showman named Fire Eater appeared. His black beard reached the ground, and his eyes were like red flames. He carried a whip, and all the puppets trembled with fear. When the show was over, Fire Eater roared,
Bring Pinocchio. I need his wooden body for a fire to cook my dinner.
Oh, Daddy, save me! I don't want to die!
wept Pinocchio. Fire Eater's heart was not really hard, and he started sneezing. The puppets cheered because this meant Pinocchio was saved. Pinocchio climbed up the showman's beard and gave him a loud thank you kiss. Then, all the puppets ran back to the stage and danced until dawn. Next day, Pinocchio told Fire Eater about his poor old father. Fire Eater sneezed again and gave Pinocchio 5 pieces of gold for Geppetto. Pinocchio meets a fox and a cat. Pinocchio was overjoyed and started for home. But soon he met a lame fox and a blind cat. He proudly showed them his gold and told them he'd buy a schoolbook and a gold coat for Geppetto. The fox and cat shook their heads.
Studying is bad,
They said.
It made us lame and blind.
Nearby, a blackbird called,
Pinocchio, don't listen to bad friends, or you'll be sorry.
Poor bird! The cat swallowed him, feathers and all. Soon the fox said,
Would you like to double your money?
How?
In the field of miracles. You bury your gold, and next morning you'll find a tree covered with gold pieces.
Pinocchio tried hard to resist, but the temptation was too great. Forgetting his father's new coat, he exclaimed,
All right, let's go.
The Red Crab Inn. After walking many miles, they stopped at the Red Crab Inn. Pinocchio was much too excited to eat, but the others ordered a huge feast. They all went to separate rooms to rest, agreeing to start again at midnight. Pinocchio was just dreaming of trees full of gold when the innkeeper knocked loudly on his door.
Are my friends ready?
Asked the puppet.
They left 2 hours ago.
Did they pay for their supper?
Asked the puppet.
Of course not. They were too polite. They'll meet you at sunrise in the field of miracles.
So Pinocchio paid for the supper with 1 gold piece and started into the black night. He was very frightened, but then he saw a tiny light on a tree. It was the ghost of the talking cricket.
Pinocchio, please go home and take the gold pieces to your poor, sad father. Remember that children who do as they please will be sorry later.
Pinocchio answered,
That's an old story. My father will be rich tomorrow. Good night, Cricket.
Good night, Pinocchio. Be careful of assassins.
Pinocchio told himself he wasn't afraid of assassins, but he hid the gold pieces under his tongue. Suddenly, two black figures grabbed him and roared, "Your money or your life!" When Pinocchio didn't answer, they said, "We'll kill your father too!" When Pinocchio cried,
Oh no, not my father!
the gold clinked in his mouth. Aha! Now we know! They tried to pull his nose up and his chin down, but they couldn't open his mouth. Then, one tried to force his mouth open with a knife, but Pinocchio bit off his hand and spat it out. What a surprise! It was a cat's paw! Pinocchio broke away and ran across the field with the assassins close behind. They ran for miles until Pinocchio came to a little house. He knocked, but no one answered. Then he kicked and banged the door, and a beautiful blue-haired child opened a window. Her face was pure white, and her eyes were closed.
There's no one here. They're all dead. But you're here,
cried Pinocchio.
Please let me in. I'm dead too.
Just then, the assassins grabbed Pinocchio and hung him from a tree branch with a rope around his neck. The north wind tossed him all night, and as he felt death near, he whispered,
Oh, Daddy, if only you were here.
The beautiful child felt sorry when she saw him hanging stiff and lifeless. She sent a magnificent carriage driven by a fancy-coated poodle to rescue him. The fairy, that's what she was, carried him to bed. She mixed some white powder in water for his fever.
I won't drink it if it's bitter,
said Pinocchio weakly. The fairy promised him a lump of sugar, but he ate the sugar first and still refused the medicine. The fairy kept trying, but at last 4 black rabbits entered, carrying a little black coffin. We've come to take you away.
But I'm not dead,
cried Pinocchio. You will be soon. Pinocchio grabbed the glass and drank the medicine quickly. The rabbits left angrily. Immediately, Pinocchio was completely well, and he told the fairy all about his adventures.
Where are the gold pieces?
Asked the fairy.
I've lost them,
lied Pinocchio, and suddenly his nose grew 2 inches longer.
Where? In the woods nearby.
His nose grew still longer.
No, I remember. I swallowed them.
Now his nose was so long he couldn't turn his head. The fairy laughed and said,
Your kind of lies have long noses.
Pinocchio cried and screamed until the fairy called 1,000 woodpeckers to peck his nose back to normal. Pinocchio promised he would be good and go to school. He really meant it. But Pinocchio breaks his promise. Pinocchio met the cat and the fox again, and they pretended to be shocked when he told them about the assassins. Pinocchio noticed the cat had lost its paw, but it explained it had given it to a starving wolf to eat. Again, they headed for the Field of Miracles. When they reached it, Pinocchio buried his gold and ran to a stream for some water. When he returned, the gold was gone. High in a tree, A parrot was laughing at him.
Ah ha ha ha! Your friends dug up your money and disappeared.
Pinocchio was completely shocked, but he headed straight for home. He was very hungry, so he stopped to pick some purple grapes. Snap! He was caught in a trap. He cried with fright, and soon a farmer, carrying a lantern, found him. "So, you are the one who has been eating my chickens," he roared.
No, no,
Pinocchio sobbed.
I only wanted some grapes.
But the farmer dragged him home and fastened a heavy dog collar around his neck. "My watchdog died," said the farmer. "So you will take his place. You can sleep in the doghouse and be sure to bark if thieves come." At midnight, Pinocchio was awakened by 4 ugly polecats who loved eating eggs and chickens. The dead watchdog had always helped them, so they expected Pinocchio to cooperate too. Instead, he started to bark. "Bow, wow, 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 wow!" And the farmer rushed to the chicken yard. He put the polecats in a sack and set Pinocchio free. This time, he ran without stopping. But the fairy's little house had disappeared. In its place was a white stone with these sad words engraved on it. "Here lies the blue-haired fairy who died of sorrow because Pinocchio left her." Pinocchio fell on the ground and wept for having been such a bad boy. A large pigeon alighted near him and asked,
Do you know Geppetto?
He's my father. Tell me quickly, is he alive?
Yes. He made a boat to look for you, and he's far out at sea. I'll fly you there.
Pinocchio held tight to the pigeon's neck, and they flew all day. When they reached the shore, the pigeon flew away before Pinocchio could thank it. People on shore were shouting and pointing to a tiny boat. Pinocchio screamed,
It's my father!
Geppetto waved his cap, but suddenly the boat disappeared under a huge wave. The people walked sadly away, but Pinocchio jumped into the sea shouting,
I'll save you, father!
Busy Bee Town. Pinocchio swam all night, but in the morning he climbed on shore. While drying his clothes, he asked a big dolphin who was passing by about his father.
He was probably swallowed by the huge shark whose mouth could hold a railway train.
This terrified the puppet, and he ran off through the busy bee town, where everyone was working hard. Although Pinocchio was lazy, he was very hungry. No one would give him food unless he helped. At first, he refused, but finally he carried a heavy pail of water for a woman. At home, she gave him a delicious meal. He gobbled it up and then looked at the lady.
Ha-hoo!
It was the fairy. Pinocchio threw his arms around her and promised again to be good forever.
Then you must go to school and choose some work.
Pinocchio made a wry face and said,
I don't like to work. I don't want to learn.
My child,
said the fairy.
People who don't work turn into donkeys.
This frightened Pinocchio.
I'll study. I'll work. I'll do anything you say because I want to be a real boy.
So Pinocchio went to school faithfully. The boys teased him about his clothes, but the schoolmaster praised his work. Unfortunately, he liked some good-for-nothing boys in his class. One day, the boys said,
There's a shark as big as a mountain in the sea. Let's go see it.
At first, Pinocchio said,
No.
remembering his fairy mother. But the boys argued that it would only take a short time. When they reached the shore, there was no shark, and the boys laughed.
Ha ha! It's a joke on Pinocchio!
Then the boys threw their heavy books at him. But he ducked, and one hit another boy who fell to the ground. When only Pinocchio stayed to help him, he was arrested by a policeman. He tried to run away, but a great police dog, Alidoro, chased him. Pinocchio is almost fried. The terrible animal was only inches away when Pinocchio leapt like a frog into the sea. Alidoro couldn't stop and plunged into the water too, but he couldn't swim. The dog cried for help, and Pinocchio kindly pulled him to safety. Then he swam away fast until he saw a cave with smoke coming from it. Suddenly he was caught in a net of squirming fish, and an ugly giant with green skin and a long green beard yelled,
What a fine dinner!
He rolled each fish in flour and dropped it into a pot of boiling oil. Pinocchio was screaming,
I'm not a fish!
But the monster rolled him in flour too. He was just about to throw Pinocchio into the pot when a big dog who had smelled the fish ran into the cave. The fisherman tried to kick Alidoro out, but then the dog heard a tiny voice saying,
Save me, Alidoro, or I'll be fried.
The dog caught Pinocchio gently in his mouth and ran from the cave. When they were safe, Pinocchio thanked him and started for home. It was a stormy night, and Pinocchio ran to the fairy's house. When he knocked, a large snail called from the 4th floor window.
Who's there?
I'm the puppet who lives with the fairy. Is she home?
She's asleep,
said the snail.
I'll come down, but remember, snails never hurry.
2 hours later, the snail looked out of the 3rd floor window. Then, several more hours passed, and Pinocchio became so angry he kicked his foot right through the door, where it stuck. At dawn, the snail arrived after 9 hours. Pinocchio begged for something to eat. 3.5 hours later, the snail arrived again. This time, it was carrying a tray full of wonderful food, all plaster and paper. Poor Pinocchio fainted. When he awoke, the fairy was beside him.
I'll forgive you once more, but it's the last time,
she said. Pinocchio swore he'd be good, and for the rest of the year, he was the best student at school. The fairy was so pleased, she promised to make him a real boy the very next day. She even prepared a party for his friends. After kissing the fairy and promising to be back by dark, the puppet ran off to invite his friends. But Pinocchio goes to Playland. Lampwick, the laziest boy at school, was Pinocchio's best friend. When Pinocchio found him hiding under a porch, Lampwick told him he was running away to Playland, where every day was a holiday. He tried to persuade Pinocchio to join him, but he shook his head. However, when he saw a coach filled with laughing boys, he said, "I'm coming too." The coach was drawn by 12 little donkeys, and the driver was round and soft and greasy. When Pinocchio jumped on the back of one of the donkeys, it tried to throw him off. Pinocchio heard it whisper,
You poor fool, you'll be sorry. Someday you'll be just like me.
As they reached Playland, they could hear gay voices shouting, whistling, and hand-clapping. Pinocchio and Lampwick joined the others, and what fun they had, day after day. No school, no studying, just playing all day long. Pinocchio becomes a donkey. It was 5 months later that Pinocchio woke one morning and had an unpleasant surprise. He had grown a magnificent pair of donkey's ears. He hid them under a cotton cap. But soon, he and Lampwick were running on their hands and feet. Worst of all, they grew tails and brayed horribly instead of talking. Pinocchio joins a circus. The coachman sold Lampwick to a farmer, and Pinocchio was bought for a circus. He was whipped and had to eat dry hay. Every day he had to learn tricks and dancing. 3 months later, Pinocchio was to appear in the center ring for the first time. He looked lovely, decorated with shiny leather and brass with flowers around his ears. When he bowed to the audience, he saw a beautiful lady wearing a picture of a puppet on a gold chain. It was his picture, and he tried to call to the blue fairy. But he could only bray. Everyone laughed, and the lady disappeared. Pinocchio's eyes filled with tears. When he tried to jump through a hoop, his leg caught and he fell. The ringmaster sold the lame donkey to a man who wanted his skin for a drum. The new owner tried to drown the donkey, but instead, he turned into a puppet again. Pinocchio is swallowed by a shark. The man was so angry that Pinocchio swam quickly away. In the sea, he saw a little blue goat standing on a white rock, calling him. He swam toward the rock, but suddenly a great sea monster swallowed him. It was very dark, and Pinocchio sobbed,
"Help! Save me!"
Who could save you?
asked a voice.
"Who's speaking?"
asked Pinocchio fearfully.
I'm a tunny fish. What kind of fish are you?
"I'm not a fish, and I want to escape. How big is this shark?"
It's a mile long.
Just then, Pinocchio saw a gleam of light far away. He said goodbye to the tunny and crept toward the light. Pinocchio finds someone. He walked until he saw an old white-haired man sitting at a little table with a candle on it.
Oh, Daddy, I found you!
He cried.
I'll never leave you again.
Geppetto embraced his son, and they told each other everything that had happened. Pinocchio decided to escape, so they went quietly through the whole body until they came to the throat. The old shark slept with his mouth open. Carefully they climbed along his tongue, but the shark sneezed and they fell back. They tried again and finally climbed over the 3 rows of teeth. Geppetto couldn't swim, so he jumped on Pinocchio's back. They swam and swam, but the old man was shivering with cold and fright. Pinocchio pretended to be cheerful, but he was growing weaker. Finally, he said,
Daddy, I'm dying.
Who's dying? Is that Pinocchio?
Yes. Who are you?
I'm the tutty fish. I escaped too. Get on my back. I'll help you.
At last they reached land, and Pinocchio kissed the tunny's nose. Geppetto leaned on Pinocchio, who helped him to walk slowly. They passed 2 ugly faces begging by the road. It was the fox and the cat, but they were completely changed. The cat was really blind now, and the fox had sold his tail. They begged Pinocchio to help them. But at last, he understood how wicked they were.
Goodbye, scoundrels,
He called and walked on. They came to a charming little cottage and heard a tiny voice call.
Come in.
When they entered, they could see no one.
I'm up here on the roof. Do you remember throwing a hammer at me?
Said the talking cricket.
Yes, dear cricket,
Said Pinocchio.
you can throw a hammer at me now, but please don't hurt my poor father.
The cricket told them the house belonged to a goat with blue hair, who had left yesterday, saying,
Poor Pinocchio. I shall never see him again.
Pinocchio burst into tears.
Oh, it must be my darling little fairy.
Then he made a bed for Geppetto and asked the cricket where he could get some milk for him. He ran to the farmer's house, but the milk cost a penny. He agreed to carry 100 buckets of water for 1 cup of milk. For 5 months, he worked from dawn, like a donkey, to earn milk for his father. The farmer's donkey, Lampwick, had just died of overwork. He also learned to weave baskets for sale. He practiced reading and writing every night, using a twig and blackberry juice. Pinocchio becomes a real boy. The old woodcutter lived comfortably now, and Pinocchio was even able to buy him a new suit. Finally, Pinocchio had saved enough to buy himself new shoes. On the way to town, he met a snail who told him the blue fairy was sick and penniless. Pinocchio forgot about his shoes and gladly sent his 2 shillings to his kind fairy.
I've been working for my father until now, but I will work 5 hours longer for my dear fairy mother.
That night, Pinocchio worked until midnight, making 16 baskets instead of 8. In his sleep, he dreamed the lovely fairy gave him a kiss, saying,
Brave Pinocchio, I forgive you. You have a good heart, and you have loved your parents and helped them.
When he awoke, he was astonished, for he was no longer a puppet. He was a real boy. Pretty clothes and boots were on a chair, and inside a small purse there were 20 gold pieces. He ran and found his father, completely well now, and happily carving on some wood. Pinocchio hugged him and asked,
Where is the old wooden puppet?
There he is,
answered Geppetto, and sure enough, a large puppet was leaning against a chair, with its head on one side, its arms hanging loosely, and its 2 legs bent and crossed. Pinocchio looked at it and smiled to himself.
How ridiculous I was when I was a puppet. I'm so happy to be a real boy.